this time I'd like to welcome Rabbi Horowitz and Chico Nealy Nkwocha, who will be in conversation about different events in the civil rights movement and the history there. Rabbi David Horowitz is the Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Israel in Akron, Ohio. Rabbi Horowitz served congregations also in Indianapolis and Hammond, Indiana, as well as Queensland, Australia. The rabbi is a scholar, theologian, and social activist whose career has encompassed leadership in all of those areas. He has a bachelor's degree in English literature from Tulane University, and a second bachelor's of Hebrew letters, a Master of Arts, his ordination, and Doctor of Divinity, all from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. He has been a professor of philosophy and theology at Calumet College in Indiana, and has taught courses in ethnic studies at Kent State University. Rabbi Horowitz serves as the national president of PFLAG, Parents, Friends, and Families of Lesbians and Gays, and served also as the local president for the Akron chapter. He lectures widely on issues dealing with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender concerns, as well as a variety of Judaic subjects at academic institutions, religious institutions, both in the United States and internationally. His community leadership includes serving as a member of the Jewish Community Board of Akron, the National Committee on HIV/AIDS for the Union for Reformed Congregations, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the Institutional Review Board of the Akron Children's Hospital, the Akron Area Interfaith Council, the Blossom Board of Overseers, and chair of the Community Relations Council. So welcome, Rabbi Horowitz.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you for those nice introductory words.
You're quite welcome. And Chico Nealy Nkwocha is a 2020 graduate of Akron Early College High School. She currently attends the Ohio State University, and she's double majoring in biomedical engineering and studio art with a minor in city and regional planning. Chika is extremely proud of her Nigerian American heritage. She is a national award-winning artist. Her passion for civic and social justice and for showcasing the Black experience inspires her art and has led her to be a voice for social change in her community. So welcome, Chika.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chika, who's going to engage in a conversation with Rabbi Horowitz.
Hi, Chico Nealy.
Hi, nice to meet you. So once again, I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity and thank you for agreeing to, have this conversation, which I do believe is very important, especially at the time that we're in our country. So just thank you for that. But I'd first like to start by getting your background so I could understand your story more. So what would you identify as in regards to culture and race and also religion? I mean, I think we can understand it for the best part, but if you could explain that, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you. I grew up in a Jewish household in Miami, Florida, well before Miami, Florida was what it is today. I had to get over seeing my name listed as an elder expert. The elder part initially bothered me. However, I can own that. The expert's a whole other question. Miami at that time was a very segregated city. I went to segregated schools, all of my elementary school and high school days in Miami. I remember vividly when the buses in Miami were integrated. They had been segregated. Negroes, as the term was politely used then, were made to sit in the back of the bus while white people sat up front. And one day they announced that that was going to change. This was in the late 1950s. And I took a bus that day. And I took a bus just to see what would happen. And in fact, nothing happened. So that was my background. I remember water fountains being separated. I remember bathrooms being separated. I remember waiting rooms being separated. I went on to go to Tulane University in New Orleans. Things were not much different there. At the time, Tulane was also a segregated university, but only segregated for Blacks. There were Asians that were part of the student body. There were other people of color who were part of the student body, but at the time there were no individuals that identified as Black individuals who were part of the student body or faculty. I entered in 1960. In 1963, steps were taken to begin the process of desegregating Tulane University. At the time, that was only one African-American student, a graduate student in political science, who was living in the dormitory. There was a rally on the steps of the City Hall in New Orleans in 1963, and I was part of an organization known as Hillel. Hillel is the Jewish students organization on most campuses. And I was sitting there, and the Hillel director got a call saying, is there anybody that can come down and speak at the rally in City Hall tonight? Well, since I was sitting there, I got tapped to do it. And I did indeed go down there. And I know that I probably didn't speak for more than 30 seconds. And I know I didn't say anything terribly important or profound. But it turned out that I was the other white speaker. There was the Catholic priest that was there, and I was there, and those were the only two white presenters at the program. That catapulted me actually into some national news, which surprised me and surprised them. But that was my first experience really of taking an active vocal role in trying to address the social justice issues that existed in the African-American community. At the time in the 1960s, the Jewish community and the African-American community were closely allied. And many of the demonstrations that took place throughout the South included Jewish individuals from all over the country. So I felt comfortable in doing that. And I want to quickly relate one story. I was doing a paper in political science, and I went to the one African-American student for help. And he said that he would help me and he would take my questionnaire into the Black community. But he wanted to go over it with me. And at the time, I was just about a week and a half away from getting married. And I had just taken an apartment. We had not moved into the apartment yet, but the apartment was close to campus. I said, great, we'll walk down to the apartment and we'll talk about the questionnaire. And as I was walking down the street, I looked up and there was a dry cleaning establishment and laundry right across the street from the apartment. And there was a big sign in the window that said, whites only, Negroes in uniform will be permitted, meaning maids and butlers and that sort of thing. And I got to tell you, I wish that the sidewalk I was walking on would collapse and envelop me because my embarrassment was so great. And then I realized for the first full time how much humiliation the African-American community was receiving in New Orleans, and I suspect not only New Orleans.
Wow, it's a really interesting experience to be able to explain that. I mean, it says a lot. But one of my questions would be: would you say that the segregation that was at the time, was it more race related, or did it also branch out to religion in terms of like were Jews segregated, or was that not?
No, it was racial. It was most definitely racial. Jews have historically and still suffered the plague of anti-Semitism. Certainly that's true today. In fact, I was watching the images of the breach of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. And one of the participants there was wearing a sweatshirt, I think. It didn't look like a t-shirt, it was a sweatshirt. And emblazoned on it were the words Camp Auschwitz, indicating so very strongly that somehow Jews were a problem, obviously, and that they should be eradicated, and celebrating the Holocaust years. So in that moment, if not before, I realized that we're all in this together, that if any one person because of race or religion are discriminated against, and I would include those in the Muslim community as well. As long as we allow that discrimination to take place, we are all open to discrimination in the minority communities.
And I guess to add to that, what other minority groups or marginalized groups of people, especially in the United States, would you also say that you took up the fight for, in addition to African Americans in America and also the Jewish community?
Well, I think that the Muslim community has certainly faced great problems, especially in the last 3, almost 4 years. I would also include the Hispanic community. Interestingly enough, in Miami, which at that time was rapidly becoming heavily Hispanic, nonetheless, there wasn't a great deal of discrimination. There was a sense of separation, so that Hispanic people tended to live in particular areas together. And I think they did that primarily because of language. But I happened to live in an area that became Hispanic and Spanish speaking. I didn't sense that they were part of the group that was directly targeted for segregation.
That makes sense. And then also understanding that, as marginalized groups, like, we have experienced some types of trauma in America because of our, I guess, our identities. How would you say we should bridge the gap between each other because of the fact that we all are in the same struggle?
And I think we're natural allies. I really do. I think that was true in the 1960s. Again, a quick story. I went to a barber shop to get a haircut in New Orleans, and sitting on the desk or the table close to the barber was a table of pamphlets. And one of the pamphlets showed Jews and African Americans being seen as equals, and not in a good way. I think there is also a feeling among those who are deeply prejudiced that somehow or other Jews are behind the Black struggle, and that we're causing the Black struggle, and that we're to take blame for the Black struggle. I think that there has been some separation along the way between the two communities. I think that, and again, well before you were born, I think that probably started in the very late 1960s with the teachers' strike in New York City, where most of the teachers in Black areas were Jewish, and there was a strong feeling on the part of the African American community that should change. And I think there was a friction that started there. I think that it was further separated by the feeling on the part of the African American communities that Jews were too much a part of the movement, that too much of a part of the control of the movement. The NAACP, after all, was founded by a Jew, not an African American. And so from that perspective, I think tensions began to form. I sense that for the last 10, maybe 15 years, those tensions have relaxed. And I'm optimistic that we can help one another, because certainly there is anti-Black sentiment in the Jewish community. I would be really, really lying to you if I said that didn't exist. And I suspect as well that there's anti-Semitic feelings in the African American community. So at this point, because we are both, I think, necessary to this struggle together, we have to take steps to start bridging those gaps and those stereotypes that have come up with in terms of the two communities.
Rabbi Horowitz, there was a very strong link between African Americans and Jews, and a pretty strong alliance during the civil rights movement itself. How do you think we might leverage some of that connection from over half a century ago to some of the contemporary struggles and oppressions that plague both communities and could in fact unite the communities?
It's an excellent question. I think that it's starting to happen. I think that discussions are open now, more so in the two communities than they were before. Having said that, both communities include people who have stereotypes of the other. I think the African American community, and I'm speaking for them and I shouldn't be, but the African American community is seen as seeing Jews as part of the white racist problem, and therefore are kind of automatically the enemy. I think the Jewish community sees the African American community as not caring about the struggle that the Jewish community has had, and also carrying those same stereotypes about the African American community. So those are the barriers, I think, that are set up right now to make it difficult between the two communities to come together. But I sense a change. I really do. Over the years, we have worked together, and we have all the way through those years worked together. There has been strain, there has been difficulty, but I sense that we have to get through those stereotypes if we're really going to make a difference.
Blacks and Jews worked very closely together during the civil rights on the campaign for the poor. How do you think we might be able to leverage this idea to our current struggles that are really based on socioeconomic oppression, in addition to race and religion?
Socioeconomic difference is probably one of the major uh, causes of oppression in the African American community. So that without solving that, without taking a look at that, without being vocal spokespeople for shoring up business interests in the African American community, of finding a way that our government, and I'm going to use the word, but I'm going to define it, finding a way that our government can pay reparations for the reality that the African community, African American, I'm sorry, community, which started in slavery and never really had a chance to economically grow. After all, the Jim Crow days destroyed any sense of progress they were making in the 1800s. It carried over into the 1900s. Banks refused loans to Jewish business people. The opportunity to own homes was very limited, and I think in some ways still is. Segregated communities was seen as not communities that ought to be invested in. And all these things, I think, have to be corrected. But one or two groups can't do that. The groups have to pressure those who have the power to do that. And that's primarily at this point the state and federal governments who can make a difference by infusing capital into the African American community and help it come forth with entrepreneurship that can make a difference in the lives of individual Black people. So from that perspective, I think that that's an obligation that the Jewish community has to carry forward, because we are part of the, quote, white people in America. And white racism exists. I think racism in all groups exists, but white racism right now is part of the problem of keeping the African American community down.
So in regards to tensions between the Black community and the Jewish community, that obviously the connection in some way has been lost throughout the years. I think some of the issues that I've heard from the African American community is that we're not necessarily relatable in our experiences in terms of how we've experienced oppression in America compared to Jewish Americans. So what would you say to an African American who believes that essentially our experiences or our oppression isn't the same because they believe that African Americans have paid more of a price, and also regarding how we haven't received reparations, but we believe that the Jewish community has, and how there might be some forms of privilege. So how would you help African Americans to understand that in some way you have experienced oppression that relates to the same way we have?
1/3 of the Jewish community was wiped out during the Holocaust. That's a tremendous loss of any people, of any group. Reparations have been made, but they've been made on a governmental level, rarely on a personal level. And I think that's important. There have been some reparations directly to Jews who lost family, homes, and art and so on during the Holocaust. But that does not make up for the fact that 1/3 of the community was exterminated. I think that there is a difference. There is a difference. Jews are not treated as poorly as the African American community in white society. We have had the opportunity to grow economically well beyond the ability of the African American community to grow their economy. So there are differences. Let's talk about the reality of that. There's definitely a difference. On the other hand, anti-Semitism is very much still a part of our society today. And we're seeing it growing. In fact, this year is probably one of the worst years for the rise of anti-Semitism. Well, maybe the last 4 years, but this year has been not good at all. So that the African American community has to understand that we feel vulnerable, that we feel at risk, and that we need those voices from the African American community to say, no, we're not going to tolerate that either. So I think that there is a necessary interrelationship that has to come if we're really going to make progress on bringing this alliance back once again. I mean, walking right next to Martin Luther King Jr. as he crossed the bridge in Selma, Alabama, was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And had the same jail experience and some broken cuts on his face as well. So that is one person, but that was representative of the community. Does everybody in the Jewish community appreciate that? No, not at all. There were people who felt that we were taking a chance of putting ourselves on the line. But it did happen, and it was there. And maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but I really feel that things have improved. I think there have been dialogues increasing between the two communities, especially on the religious levels. Jewish synagogues and churches in the African American community are more inclined to talk with one another. The fission is still there, but not only between Jews and Blacks, but between white religious leaders and African American religious leaders. I was very active in the Akron Area Interfaith Council, and I doubt that it has changed very much, but when I was there, when I was president of it, there I think was one Black minister who was a part of the African community that was on that council. Not because they weren't invited, but because they felt they had nothing to gain by being a part of it. I would hope that that too, on a broader level, is being bridged today. But certainly there's a dialogue all over the place between the two communities. What hasn't happened is an extensive visitation on a youth level between the two communities so that the young people can try to interact and understand each other.
Yeah, and I definitely would agree with that. Actually, going back to referencing Selma, I think that's where most of my experience in understanding the relationship and the history between the Jewish and the African American community comes from seeing the actual movie. And I know there was, a lot of accuracy based off of the movie into what actually happened historically, understanding that the Jewish community did walk with us, did march with us, and also some of them lost their lives in the name of desegregation and also civil rights. But going to my educational experience, I think most of that had to happen on my own. And it wasn't something that was really implemented in schools. And so one of the things that I did try to advocate for in my academic experience in high school mainly was to find ways in which we could educate people about other races, because it's not popular in our school system to learn about African American history at a positive lens, or even Jewish communities. And I think the closest experiences I ever got to learning about the Jewish struggle was watching Schindler's List or reading Anne Frank's diaries. So how would you say we should go about advocating for ways in which we can educate people so that we can bridge those gaps? Because you did say that it's important for the youth to be able to understand that. So how would you say that should be handled?
we've got to talk to each other on every level, on every age level. We're not doing that yet. Unless I've missed something along the way, we're not doing that yet. We're not bringing our youth groups together. We're not talking with one another. It's not easy to do because not everybody's a part of a youth group. So we've got to develop material that can be used in both communities to help them understand the fears and expectations of the other. I don't think we've done that. I don't think we've yet been able to develop those audiovisual materials that can help this quest for understanding. Uh, I don't know if it's changed much, but when my children were in school, history ended with the Second World War. Pretended like nothing happened after that. My grandchildren are now, one of them is a college student, one of them is out of college, and one is still in high school. And I still suspect that the history books are ending their tales with the Second World War and not realizing that history has gone on well before beyond that. I don't know that the Jewish kids know as clearly the relationship between the two communities that existed in the 1950s and 1960s. I don't know that the African American communities understand that that alliance was there because we both needed each other. Now, at that moment, the Black community needed white faces. I don't know that the Civil Rights Act of 1963 or the Voter Rights Act of 1964 would have passed without a whole bunch of white faces in the gallery of Congress. And among them were large numbers of Jews. So these are things that have to be conveyed in both communities. And I'm not pretending like we haven't been at fault in not fostering those in our religious school educational programs. I think we probably have. But how do we, I'm going to ask back, how do we get beyond the fact that not everybody's religious and not everybody is a part of a synagogue or a part of a church? How do we get into the general communities? I don't have easy answers to that because as much as we might think that our schools are desegregated, the fact of the matter is in Akron, Ohio, they are not desegregated. Most high schools, Black students go to Bookdale. Very few, I think a fair representation at Firestone where my children went and my grandchildren are going, my grandchild now. But beyond that, we're still living in a segregated school system. We are not talking with one another. So pressure has to be put upon those who have some control over that to help fix it. Busing apparently didn't work. It fragmented the Black community and it didn't integrate into the white community. So I think our problems are paramount. I think we're far from a solution to this problem. And I think it affects the Jewish community and the Black community directly, because we too are kind of concentrated in one area and are not part of the broad section of education that's going on today. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I think the problem is huge. And I don't think we've taken steps yet to be able to see a solving of those problems.
Rabbi Horowitz, you brought up earlier the insurrection that happened a few days ago. Would you like to perhaps put that event in the context of the civil rights struggles and the shared legacies of African Americans and Jewish people, and how that might relate to the fight or the struggle now in contemporary times around civil rights and social justice?
I think the divide that was represented in that incursion into the Capitol made very, very clear that the white right community is being treated very differently than the African American community. The Black Lives Matter movement has been scorned by that community, and Blacks have been murdered by police, murdered by others. The visions of what's going on today is horrifying. And I think there you're seeing a Jewish response in reality. But I think that this white racist community, and I'm going to go out on a limb. I think that the supporters, the rabid support, not everybody, the rabid supporters of the president and the conspiracy theories that have abounded all around, including the fact that Jews are responsible for the downfall of the president. And that's been on social media all the way around the place. Those kinds of things show the disparity that's there. I watched on television once I learned what was going on. I was glued to the television set. And there was no doubt in my mind that if that had been a group of people representing Black Lives Matter, or the Urban League, or the NAACP, or whatever primarily African American organization was out there, that the police would have treated the situation differently. So let's say it. I mean, the racism in this country is there, and it's been allowed to come forward because the voices of these people are being heard more loudly than the voices of sense, moderation, and justice.
I think to end on a more positive note, however, if anything that I was able to understand within the last couple months, especially the summer of 2020, is understanding that our fight, we haven't completely been alone in our fight, and being able to see young people being out on the streets protesting, not just being, African American, but, seeing other white students and college students being maced and being tear gassed and having rubber bullets shot at them. I do believe that it says a lot to far we come, how far we have come, and to understand that the civil rights movement wasn't just successful because we had Martin Luther King, but we had other allies marching with us and also taking their own lives as a result so that we can have our freedom. I think that's something that we should be able to acknowledge and see that allyship is becoming more prominent, and it's leading us to where we would like to go.
I do believe.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that's become clear. I was privileged to be asked to speak at a small rally in Hardesty Park following the murder of Rihanna. And as I stood there, I realized that, yeah, this is all of our struggles. Because again, if one people are discriminated against, and there's a difference between prejudice and discrimination. We can't wave a wand and do away with prejudice. Unfortunately, prejudice is sometimes very deeply seated. Discrimination is something different, and we can't tolerate that. And clearly, with the murders by police, law enforcement in general against the Black community, well, we've seen it this year. Okay, we'll talk about this year. We've seen it this year because now there are cameras on everybody's phone. And it became vivid images that shocked, I think, white America and certainly the Jewish community in America. So those images made it clear that something has to be done. Again, I don't think we've done it yet, but let's be frank. I think we've made some steps in the right direction, but I don't think the struggle is over. And so what do? We have to keep our voices loud. Yeah, I think the existence of white people on the streets, people like me who are still marching, although I'm elderly in the community, other people, young people, those faces are important. Let me mention another rift, however, I think that may exist in the African American and Jewish experiences. And that rift revolves around the state of Israel. I think there is a feeling that is stronger than I would like it to be in the African American community, that the Palestinian community, which is brown as opposed to white, is being tread upon. I think that there are difficulties in that struggle between the existence of Palestinians and Jews in Israel that are real, and I think they're solvable. But we can't allow ourselves to be separated by the fact that we may have disagreement over what's going on in those situations.
Thank you. And I think that, the points made by both of you are very poignant and very strong. I think that the series of events that happened in the summer truly brought out allyship. It has heightened allyship to, I think, a level that has been unseen for a number of years, at least from the perspective of the African American community, where many of the struggles and the marches and so forth, you would see many African Americans marching, but now you really do see integrated crowds marching for social justice and similar struggles. So I want to thank you, Rabbi Horowitz, for the allyship that you represent. I want to thank you very much for your time and your expert opinion today.
The expert, I believe it said.
Thank you to Chika for conducting such a wonderful interview. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today.
And I thank the Urban League for making this possible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.